it's Matt Smith here from AIM, and today I'm going to be showing you how we create request definitions within Remedyforce. And what we mean by request definition is basically something which is available to the customer within the self-service portal, so they can submit a request or an incident to us. So it might be something like a customer needs a new report. That's the example that we're going to be doing today. So they can ask for that report through the self-service portal, and that ticket gets raised and sent to the relevant people within the relevant team. So to start off with, I'm going to click on Configure Application and then go to Request Definitions. You'll see that BMC very helpfully do give us a step-by-step here, showing us how we do create them. So if you don't want to listen to me, you could always have a look at that step-by-step guide. You can see we already have quite a few request definitions already within the system. We're going to create a new one by clicking on the New button at the top left. And I'm going to give it a name. So let's say we support business objects, crystal reporting, maybe even Salesforce reporting as well, as we're using force.com. We're going to create this request definition here so the customer can get in touch with us. And in this case, they're going to ask for a new business object report. I'm going to fill out a few bits then, like the service and the service offering and the category. And you'll see that I already do have some services, service offerings and categories available to me. If I didn't already have a populated CMDB, then I could just click on the New button to the right hand side here, and this will automatically create that offering or that record within the CMDB and link it to our request definition here. Next is the incident template. If you've seen my previous video on templates, you'll know that these are used to automatically assign values to certain fields. So particularly important when it comes to a request definition, because of course the request needs to know maybe which team to go to, what impact and urgency should be associated with it, what description should it be given. And so again, I could just select an incident template that already exists, but just because they're a little bit more complex than the the service offering and the category field, I'm going to create a new one just to show you how we do that. So I'll click on the plus icon here. So we'll give it a name, and then just down the bottom here is where we say what fields we want to get populated with certain information. So for instance, our description field here, we can get that populated. And we may very well want to say which queue this would go to. So we're going to want to try and find the owner ID field here, and then say which queue is going to own this ticket once it's been created. Excellent, so that is our incident template created and assigned to our request definition. And very similarly, when it comes to the request detail template, you'll see that there are much fewer bits of information that's actually held by this particular record, and you could well just leave this completely blank, but it is a required field to be populated when you're creating your request definition. We can then add in things like price and cost if we wanted to. When you do add price and cost, you can then say what is it by, e.g. it's by named user, or it's by CPU, or by storage in gigabytes, whatever it might be. And then you can say whether that's a one-off or every hour, every day, every week, whatever it might be. Turnaround time as well, so self-service 2.0, you can display to the user how quickly that might be turned around as information purposes. Start date and end date, this is when the offering is going to become available within the self-service portal, and then when it's not going to be available within the self-service portal. So you may have a window of time there that people can submit these requests, but before and after that window of time they can't. You could also add an image as well if you like, and that's either done from your computer if it's been saved to your hard drive, or there might be an image that you already have saved within Salesforce. We're then going to give it a status, so we can say whether this is, awaiting approval before the offering is deployed. Maybe we're still at the requirements gathering stage and there's some business analysis that needs to be done to work out what questions and that type of thing are required here. I'm going to click deployed because although we haven't actually created it yet, we will do so very shortly. But you'll probably find when you're creating this in a real life environment, you probably want to keep this in draft while you're actually working on it. And then similarly, we've got a few different fields at here, so we can say this is now online. Do you want it to get automatically submitted for approval when it's submitted? And what this will do is it will just look at the approval processes that you already have within your Salesforce org, and if it matches the criteria, the entry criteria of one of those approval processes, then it will follow that approval process. And mobile as well. Importantly, if you're using the MyIT integration, you need to click mobile to make sure that it appears within MyIT. And we can then give that a save. Okay, so we haven't completed it. There's obviously just a few additional things we need to put in, like questions, which is probably the most important part of a request definition. But before we do that, I'm just going to show you a couple of the other tabs here. So entitlement, who is allowed to submit this request? You can see that it's based on account. You can also base it on different profiles and different permission sets. So you can get very specific about who is allowed to submit this request. It maybe makes less sense for this type of request here, although I guess you could have a situation where you only have certain users of business objects, so it should only be available to those certain users. But maybe you've got some new iPhones in stock and they're only allowed to be requested by the C-suite, then that might be a sort of entitlement that you'd put in here. And it's very simple. You can go through and select any of your accounts, and then within the accounts you selected above, they may only be available to certain users of different profiles. So maybe only the change manager of Busy Bee Books is allowed to submit this request. But instead I'm going to make this available to everybody. Okay, display options, just a couple of bits here. This just shows certain fields to the end user or the customer when they've opened up that request and they're completing it. So we might want to show them the turnaround time or the price or the date expected, which is the submit date plus the turnaround time. And it's up to you which of these you tick. You can also select other fields where you want the user to give you some information. So when is this required by? How many reports or new reports are required? Are you going to allow the user to attach an attachment? And if so, shall we make that required or not? And then when we come to the input tab, this is where all the magic happens. This is where we actually create the questions that the user is going to put in here. So user instructions. Just put in a brief description there. On the right hand side we then have the questions and the question types that we want here. You can see the different types of fields that are available to us. So I'm going to start off with a pick list here, and maybe we're going to ask the customer to tell us which type of chart they want. So is it a bar chart, scatter graph, pie chart, whatever it might be. So we've selected what we call the response type, or the field type. We're going to give it the input/prompt, which is basically the name of the question. And then down here within the pick list values, we're going to show which values are going to appear within that pick list. Okay, and you'll notice that BMC helpfully tell us how we should be formatting this information. So there's both a display value and also a stored value. So the displayed value is what the customer sees, and the stored value is what's kind of saved to the database and is handled by the back end. In this example here, I'm just going to use the same for both, and it's just a very simple case of giving your first value with speech marks around it with a comma, and then your second value with speech marks around it. Once you've put it in that format, you can click on add, and you'll see that they automatically get added to our displayed value section here. And I might want to have a default value, so maybe customers are always requesting bar charts, so instead of having them select it from the pick list, let's get this as the default value. We've then got a few questions here. Is this a required question? Do we want to actually hide this? Although it exists, they can't see it. Conditional we'll come on to shortly. This means that this question will only appear under certain circumstances. And those circumstances are basically the answers that have been provided to a preceding question. Also a checkbox here around the UI, so you're going to show in one column or two columns. Invoke templates, so this will allow us to automatically create a related task. So a task will be created and automatically associated with our request definition once it's been created. And allow multiple selections, so would you want the customer to select a scatter graph and a bar chart at the same time? In this case, I don't want them to. There we go, so I've clicked on Save and New. A question has been popped here, and we've got the new screen to add a new question. So what I'm going to do now is add another pick list field, and this is going to be asking for the colours that the customer wants within their pie chart. In this case, we're going to make it required. We're going to have allow multiple selection, and importantly, we want this to be conditional, because for instance, if someone asks for a scatter graph, it doesn't make any sense to ask them about how they want their pie chart to be formatted. So after I've clicked on conditional, you'll see the display if ... button becomes available. I can then click on that and work out what the inputs are, what the input conditions are for this. So for instance, I could have report type equals pie chart, and as long as that criteria is met, this question will become available. And importantly, you see I've clicked required. That of course isn't globally true. It's only going to be required, e.g. mandatory, if that condition is met. So if someone asks for a scatter graph, they're obviously not going to be able to complete this question because they won't be able to see it, but they will still be able to submit the request because it's not visible to them. Maybe let's put in a text area field just to ask for a description of the report. And again, let's make that required. So you see we've just got 3 questions here. They can be moved around if you want, so you can single click on it and click on up. You can also clone a question, so I don't know, maybe you've got a rather complex question with like a pick list for instance, and it's got a load of different values in and you just want to clone that instead of creating a new one, then you can do so. One of the things I want to show as well is just around the one of the checkboxes that we saw earlier around the invoke template. So as I mentioned, what this does is if this certain criteria is met, so e.g. the customer selects scatter graph as an example from here, we might want to have a separate task to go off. So you might think that for scatter graph reports there's an additional step that needs to be done. Maybe there is another team that needs to be involved. We could have a task that would fire off under those circumstances. A much better example for the invocation of templates is probably for something like a new joiner. So imagine for your new joiners you may have a number of different fields saying, you know, what hardware do you need, what software do you need, what desk are they going to sit at, and depending on the answers to those questions different tasks are going to fire off. So what I'm going to do here, just to demonstrate this concept, and this is a part of the form that we haven't yet seen. I will come on to this in a bit more detail once we've sorted our questions out. Is I'm just going to add a template in. So in order to invoke a template, we obviously need to tell the system which template to invoke. So I'm going to create a new task template here. Right, simple as that. We've got our task and it will appear in our box here. What we can then do is if we click on our invoke template box here, you'll see very similar to the conditional box, we then get this new button that appears. If we click on condition to invoke, we can then say we want this template here to fire when this value is selected. Click on add and then it just gives you a little overview of what you've actually asked for. Then we'll give that a save. And then finally, if we just go to fulfillment, you'll see that we have our fulfillment templates there, so we can see our task we've just created. But then very importantly, you'll see down here we have the ability to map certain values to certain fields within our request. So for instance, we might want the description that the customer has entered in their request definition to go into the description field within the ticket. And maybe when it comes to the scatter graph task that we created, maybe we want the report type to go to the description field and also the description to go to the description field. So whatever it might be, it was just really to show you how you can have different mappings for different tickets that you create. It's not necessarily consistent, doesn't need to be consistent across whether it's an incident or a service request or a task. They can all be different if you like them to be. And then we'll give that a save. So I'm just going to come into the self-service portal then and show you what this looks like. So at the top left I've just searched for new BO report and you'll see that it's returned it. We have our image there as well and it's all available to us because it's online, it's within the service window. The entitlements are for everybody, so I can see this particular service request. I can give it a click. You'll see that some of the fields that we selected to be available within the display tab are available to us here. And just to show you how the conditional questions work, if I click on pie chart, pie chart question appears. If I go for scatter graph, it disappears. I can then give the description and click submit. What this is doing is it's now creating a new request, and this is within the incident area of the system, within the incident object, number 603 it's just told me. It's also creating that task that you remember we did that's been conditionally fired because we've asked for a scatter graph. So here we go, number 603. You see it's highlighted in blue because it's a new record, it hasn't yet been progressed in any way. The analyst can see certain information about it, such as the questions and the answers that have been provided by the customer. If we click on details, you'll see that this has automatically been submitted for approval, and you'll see although we did tell it to create a task hasn't yet been created, and that's because it is pending approval. And what will happen is once the approvers come in and they've approved work to actually start on the record, a linked task will then become created. So that was a brief overview of request definitions and how they work within Remedyforce. If you do have any questions, please do let me know. My details are going to be added as a slide to the end of the video. Thank you very much.